After nearly a full year of a whole lot of Zoom school for kids across Massachusetts, Governor Charlie Baker announced today the state is moving to phase out remote-only learning and get most kids fully back into classrooms, starting with elementary schools by April.
Many districts have worked hard to create strong learning experiences for their students, but I think we all agree there's no substitute for in-person learning, especially for kids in elementary school. Our administration's been clear for months that the best place for kids is in the classroom.
Although the state is pushing to get as many kids back to in-person learning as possible, Education Commissioner Jeff Riley did say that parents will still have the option to keep their children remote through the end of the school year, and school districts can apply for waivers to take a more incremental approach. State officials are also hoping to start the next phase of the vaccine rollout by April, making a wider swath of essential workers eligible, including teachers and other education workers. But even if they do manage to get a first shot before then, it will still take weeks for a second dose and full immunity to develop. We'll talk much more about this in tomorrow's show when the president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association joins me. We'll also likely hear much more about this and other concerns about the state's bumpy rollout Thursday, when Governor Baker testifies in the first of several oversight hearings before the state legislature. And speaking of big hearings, Washington lawmakers held their first today on the deadly attack on the Capitol with some dramatic testimony.
Based on the intelligence, we all believed that the plan met the threat and that we were prepared. We now know that we had the wrong plan.
The events I witnessed on January 6th was the worst attack on law enforcement and our democracy that I've seen in my entire career. These criminals came prepared for war. A clear lack of accurate and complete intelligence across several federal agencies contributed to this event.
Chief Son was pleading for the deployment of the National Guard. And in response to that, there was not an immediate yes. I was just stunned.
Most senators on both sides of the aisle spent the hearing trying to get to the bottom of what went wrong and what needs to happen to prevent future attacks. Although Ted Cruz took some heat for scrolling through his phone during former Capitol Police Chief Sun's testimony, must have been checking on Snowflake, and Ron Johnson opted to use the occasion to read excerpts from an essay published last month in The Federalist of a supposed eyewitness account that claimed Antifa or other leftist agitators were involved in the attack, and that there was a prearranged plan to storm the Capitol building to manipulate the unsuspecting crowd as cover and as a follow-on force. And while that last part may be true, the claims of Antifa and leftist agitators have been investigated by the FBI, which found no evidence such people were involved. In other words, it's a conspiracy theory being pushed on the floor of Congress again, the kind that prompted my next guest to recently argue the Republican Party is stuck, probably irreversibly, in a doom loop of Bizarro. That would be Nobel Prize-winning economist and New York Times columnist Paul Krugman, whose latest book, Arguing with Zombies, Economics, Politics, and the Fight for a Better Future, is out in paperback on Thursday. Paul, it's good to see you again.
Good to be on.
What is a doom loop of Bizarro exactly, Paul Krugman?
Oh, it's one of those, well, there are a lot of doom loops these days, but the doom loop of Bizarro is where things that are demonstrably false become badges of identity. You can't, at this point, pretty much, you cannot be a Republican in good standing unless you claim to believe in crazy things. And that further narrows the focus of the party. And so we have a party that is completely now detached from reality, detached from any notion, among other things. It's a party which simply does not accept the legitimacy of any political opposition. If a Republican doesn't win, then it has to have been fraud. And so, and of course, this also extends to policy stuff. So you have something like a deep freeze in Texas, which is clearly the heart of it was actually natural gas supply, but somehow or other it was the Green New Deal that did it. So it's we're really off the deep end.
So speaking of being off the deep end and the big lie about the election, the big lie about Green New Dealitis out of Texas, until a critical mass of Republicans return to planet Earth, what exactly is their end game? I'm missing it.
Oh, their end game is, well, I mean, you really should be talking to people who are more expert in the political science here, but first of all, no, I think it's essentially impossible that a critical mass of the existing party is going to return to planet Earth. There might be defections. There may be effectively a breakaway party, but I don't think the party is now capable of reforming itself. The end game is really one of trying to prevent voting. We're seeing a huge wave of voter suppression measures at the state level going through, underway right now, and perhaps eventually, what happened on January 6th, it wasn't a very competent armed insurrection, but it was an armed insurrection against the U.S. government, an attempt to overthrow the results of an election. So, I don't know. The question is not what's the end game for the Republicans. The question is what is the end game for America?
Well, let's talk in the interim about the end game for Democrats. Last time you were here, you said, to me, bipartisanship is not the goal. Getting stuff done is the goal. Right. So if you endorse the go big, go it alone route, which Joe Biden appears to have embraced as well, why not change Senate rules and embrace go big, go it alone on everything? Voting rights, climate, immigration. Would. Why not everything?
I would, but that requires Democrats need to do that. They need to actually say, okay, the filibuster has become an impediment to cannot work, and there are apparently still some Democratic senators who are not willing to go there, and I don't know whether that will change in the weeks ahead. So for now, the go big strategy is limited to this specific on fiscal. Anything that can be construed basically as fiscal policy becomes we have this arcane procedure, reconciliation, but basically as long as there's money involved, then you can bypass that, and that's what's going to happen. So, and I have to say, in terms of the immediate politics, and of course in terms of recovering from this pandemic, the crucial thing now is to get a big package of economic relief through, and that appears to be on track.
Even if there are 50 votes for some things, there are probably, at least it seems to me, not 50 votes for taxes. I think you called this the Twinkie Manifesto. I think you're sort of pining away for marginal tax rates, which what were in the 80s or 90s, in the 50s.
93% under
was it 93?
Dwight Eisenhower.
Well, I think you wrote in that chapter, that in that column too, that it was a time when economic justice and economic growth lived happily together. But assuming that they're not about to cohabitate again anytime soon, are you okay with him doing $2 trillion of COVID relief, $2 trillion of infrastructure, on and on, without paying for it? And if you are, and I know you are, why?
As it happens, one of the few silver linings of this crazy impasse we're in right now is that the world appears to be just awash in savings with no place to go. The private sector just doesn't want to invest all the money that other people in the private sector want to save, which means that we have extremely low interest rates. That money is basically looking for a home. In effect, the market is begging the U.S. government to do a lot of spending on necessary stuff, to do a lot of infrastructure spending, and to borrow the money. Interest rates are so low. I mean, if you look at the debt number, it looks enormous. If you look at the interest payments, the federal government now is spending only half as much of its budget on interest payments as it did when Ronald Reagan was president. So we're in a situation where, the political will to raise taxes is probably not there, not for some time yet. But we don't need it. Luckily, the money is available to do a lot of good stuff even without raising taxes. And maybe, hopefully, some years down the road, we will be a politically very different nation and we'll be able to do a more comprehensive reform.
Until we get to that place, is there a limit on how much the Democrats should spend if they can get 50 votes plus one in the Senate?
Well, there is it's not completely crazy to worry about the capacity of the economy. If you borrow enough and spend enough, then you do start to put some inflationary pressure on. We are probably not going to be, we're certainly not going to be in a danger zone on that with the proposal. And I'm not really worried. The thing, I look at this and say, well, okay, we had this big COVID relief bill, which is a lot of money, but probably not inflationary. And then there's a bunch of other stuff I want to do, which is infrastructure spending, is something, whatever we're calling the Green New Deal now, Build Back Better, which is going to be a big slug, but it's not going to happen right away. And we're not going to be, the big spending on pandemic relief will be already in the rearview mirror by the time any of that starts to happen. So I actually think we have plenty of running room to do all the things that we need to do, at least for the next few years.
I fear with this next question, you're going to tell me to speak to a political scientist again, but since I have you, I'm going to ask you anyway. If the Democrats are able to do this almost $2 trillion relief bill, which last time I looked has close to 80% support with the American people, majority support with the Republicans, when you see polls like we saw in USA Today from Suffolk, which say, do you believe Biden was legitimately elected? And a stunning 73% still say no. Does getting what they want begin to change minds, Paul Krugman?
Nobody has any idea. I mean, it's a very weird time now where Biden's actual policy proposals are awesomely popular. I've never seen so much public support for anything any president has. I can't remember. I mean, I can, my sort of memories go back to, I don't think anything Reagan proposed was this popular. And yet at the same time, you have a large majority of Republicans who think that he's an illegitimate president. Do people's minds change? Actually, does it even matter? How will people's votes be affected? And I guess the hope is that a president, even if they think that somehow or other, the election was stolen through, I don't know what, that they say, oh yeah, but I've got a job, I've got health care, I kind of like the way things are going, and it works, but who knows? This whole political situation we're in is just completely insane.
A doom loop of Bizarro. Paul Krugman, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.